Now, as we've been reporting this morning, polling in Iran's snap election has been extended by several hours after a low voter turnout.
A result isn't expected until later this evening, and if there isn't a clear winner, a runoff will be held between the top two finishers next Friday. Negar Mortazavi is a political analyst and host of the Iran podcast. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Good morning to you. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Now, Negar, we saw low voter turnout in March when Iran held parliamentary elections. Reportedly, there are similar low numbers for this presidential election as well. How would you explain this voter apathy?
Yes, the regime is dealing with very high voter apathy. In fact, the previous presidential election just 3 years ago had the lowest turnout in the history of the Islamic Republic. There's been a widening gap between the society and the state, a lot of grievances, especially among the young generation, political grievances, economic, even social and cultural. And this is something that even the candidates have been addressing on the campaign trail and during their debates. This election, it seems like so far as the numbers are slowly coming in, saw a little higher participation, but still it's low compared to previous presidential elections in the Islamic Republic.
We'll get to the voter grievances in just a minute, but I want to talk about how opinion polls are pointing to a reformist former heart surgeon and health minister Masud Pezeshkian, who's aligned himself with former reformist president Hassan Rouhani, and he seems to be in the lead. He's the favoured one, according to opinion polls. What's his appeal?
Indeed, he is the sole reformist candidate who was allowed to run by the Guardian Council. In the previous presidential election, they essentially disqualified or banned any real reformists or popular moderates from running. This time, this came as a surprise. He wasn't a big-name reformist, but nevertheless, he was a minister in the reformist government of President Khatami, a heart surgeon, as you said, 5-time member of parliament also. He seems to have gained some popularity among some ethnic groups, some women in the younger generation, and a lot of, essentially mobilizing a lot of what we see as opposition votes, people who are not happy with the elections or the regime, but in fact trying to show their protest in a democratic way with a vote that they see as the furthest away from what the regime has offered them in the past few years.
But then again, okay, so if he fashions himself as a reformist candidate, really how reformist or how reformist can a progressive candidate be, given that the Guardian Council and the 85-year-old supreme leader really has influence over all in Iran?
Well, not very radical. He actually, in fact, on the campaign trail has reiterated that he's not here to essentially bring any radical revolutionary change, but nevertheless, he has challenged the status quo. So I think, and that's one of the reasons, that's the reason he could pass through that very tight filtering of the Guardian Council as the sole reformist. Even that came as a surprise. So I think his attempt is trying to balance a challenge of the status quo with also showing stability and not trying to go too radical to sort of completely rattle the system or rock the boat. And that has been also one of the criticisms of some of the voters and the constituents, that he didn't go strong enough or radical enough, or he didn't have slogans that some of the voters expected.
Let's get to the voter frustration here. There's a lot of grievance over the poor economy, which has been affected by decades of sanctions by Western nations. There's high youth unemployment. There's also complaints about corruption within the government as well. What can a president in Iran do to address these grievances?
These are, as you said, very serious grievances, mostly economic and political, and very much tied to each other. And they were the predominant factors when we were listening to the live presidential debates on television and some of the interviews. We have to remember the president is not the top person in power in Iran. There is a supreme leader who sits at the top, and the president is one of the people who sit in the second tier. He's essentially equal to the head of judiciary, to the speaker of the parliament. So looking at that kind of division gives us an idea of how much a president has power. It's also about how much coalition building you can make. The hardliners have been trying to consolidate power in Iran. This president, if he wins, is a reformist, so he needs to be able to sort of reach across the aisle and work with the more powerful and more militaristic core of the regime, who call a lot of the shots, especially when it comes to national security, foreign policy. So it's not an easy job, and he won't have massive influence and a lot of room to maneuver, but nevertheless, it matters who is the president. It's not like it doesn't make any difference. It really, we have seen real difference when there has been a reformist or a moderate versus a conservative and a hardliner.
I want to go back to something that Masud Pezeshkian has said in the past, part of his reformist appeal, I suppose. Now, he is advocating for closer ties with the West. And of course, you know, we have to keep in mind, too, that this is the first election since the death of Mahsa Amini, arrested by the morality police and died in custody in 2022. Now, Pezeshkian has said, and I'm going to quote here, if wearing certain clothes is a sin, the behavior towards women and girls is 100 times a greater sin. Nowhere in religion is there any permission to confront someone because of their clothing. If he wins, is this setting up a clash with the Guardian Council and the Supreme Leader?
Well, that's Pezeshkian's challenge. Again, as I said, that's the balance of how do you sort of represent and maneuver the system to be addressing the grievances. These are the social, cultural grievances of people who are opposed to a certain lifestyle, a certain dress code that's being dictated on them, but then at the same time not rocking the boat and not going too much head-to-head with the system. But he has criticized not just the killing of Mahsa Amini, but the way the morality police has dealt with women. And it seems like he is trying to at least, you know, bring a fresh perspective or new policies. And I think it will be different. It will be different compared to the hardliners and the conservatives who are actually supportive of the morality police and that kind of behavior and harassment and violence towards women.
Negar Mortazavi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.